Thank you everyone for being here for this seminar, and hello to those who are attending this presentation online. Before I start with my presentation, I would like to acknowledge that we are here today on the land of Gadigal people of Euro Nation. I pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. Today, I am presenting the findings of my MPhil thesis, which was focused on understanding the sustainability transition in decarbonizing road freight transportation in Australia under the supervision of Phil and Bob. So the core issue is a significant increase in greenhouse gases from transport in Australia. The annual emissions between 2021 and 2030 should ideally be reduced per year by 5%, but instead they are growing by 3.5% each year. Queensland has made a very interesting statement in its transport policy document, which says that unlike cars and light commercial vehicles, emissions from heavy vehicles are expected to continue rising over the coming decade. So the heavy duty diesel trucks are an issue, but do we have a solution which is available right now in the market? So zero emission trucks is the answer. But why? What is zero emission trucks and why zero emission trucks? So when I say zero emission trucks for this particular research, it includes BEVs and FCEVs. BEVs are the battery electric trucks which operate on batteries, and FCEVs are the fuel cell electric trucks which are fueled by hydrogen. Why zero emission trucks are important? A recent study which was done by Australian Trucking Association in 2022 compared different scenarios for greenhouse gas emissions. So when we compare the do nothing or the business as usual scenario as shown by this yellow line, the greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise over the coming decades. But when this is compared to the accelerated zero emission truck scenario, which is represented by the green line graph here, we can see that there's a huge difference. In accelerated zero emission scenario, the greenhouse gases are actually reducing at a very faster pace. So we do have a potential tech solution which is available in the market in the form of zero emission trucks. But when we look at the current market scenario in Australia for electric trucks, it tells a very different story. Out of a new truck market for 30,000 units each year, Australia only sold 50 units in 2020 and 150 units in 2023. Though there is an increase from 50 to 150 units in the last 3 years, but there is a huge untapped market potential for ZETs, which is shown by the yellow box here, which requires policy intervention to reach its full potential. With that background, my research objective was to identify the factors and policies which have a major impact and to understand the influence of the influence on the uptake of zero emission trucks in the Australian freight industry. My first research question was to identify the policies which either support, they assist, or they hinder the uptake of ZETs in Australia and why. Second research question, I wanted to identify the factors, including technical and non-technical, which affect the adoption of ZETs in the Australian logistic and freight industry. The third question was to understand the perception of stakeholders on the importance of ZETs towards this transition. And how do they really see ZETs as an effective climate mitigation strategy to support the achievement of net zero target for 2050? This question, the perception of stakeholders was very important, especially in the absence of any previous studies, such studies which was done to understand what stakeholders really feel about the ZETs. The last question was to understand how the identified policy initiatives, the technical and the non-technical factors, and the perception of stakeholders, they talk to each other, and the manner in which they influence the successful low carbon transition in the logistic and feed industry in Australia. Logistic and feed industry. I used social technical transition theory and multiple level perspective framework here, which was important to identify the different factors, actors at the landscape, regime, and niche level within the ecosystem for the sustainability transition. For my research, I divided the stakeholder groups into three. The first group is logistic and freight businesses, which I call as or use the acronym as LFC 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. The second group was policy stakeholders, PS 1, 2, 3. The last group, I combined the ZDT manufacturers and charging infrastructure providers. So for ZDT manufacturers, I call them as ZDT M1, 2, 3, and charging infrastructure providers as CIP. So there was just one, so CIP 1. If we actually look at the framework here, the group 1 and the group 2 stakeholders, they're actually the actors at the regime level. For the group 3, ZD manufacturers and CIP providers, they're actually the actors at the niche innovation level. For the landscape, this was a comparison with international policies. So the international policies form the landscape level. This research adopted a mixed method approach with qualitative, combined with the policy analysis and semi-structured interviews. The interviews further led to a ride in a ZET and invitation to attend Australasian Fleet Management Conference in May this year. Main attendees for this conference were actually the NSW government departments and trucking businesses. As part of my policy analysis, I studied transport policies from national and international jurisdictions. But only 3 Australian states have incorporated information to different degrees about ZETs. And those are Queensland, NSW, and Victoria. I compared these policies with international jurisdictions. California is the world leader when it comes to adoption of ZETs. I included New Zealand and Europe because they're also mentioned in the national policy documents for Australia, and they are also suggested by interviews. This electric truck policy card actually explains why the policy analysis was important. Now the table here shows just the electric truck policy scorecard because there's absolutely nothing or not much information which is available for the FCEVs at this stage in Australia. So if you look at the electric truck policy scorecard, and the different factors of regulation, financial support, charging infrastructure, or awareness, we can see that most of the states or the jurisdictions, they score either 0, 1, or 2 on a scale of 10. It's just the Victoria which is different, which had a score of 4. And this actually shows why Victoria scores the highest of all these national jurisdictions, because it has allocated a $5 million Australian dollars fund to establish something like an commercial electric vehicle innovation fund,
And they're also thinking of how to transition the Victorian workforce. So therefore, it was crucial to study the values, the actors, the political rationality, and the policy framing of the existing ZDT transport policy for all the national jurisdictions. So moving to interviews, this pie chart shows the interview response. I had sent out 70 invitations and I completed 11 interviews, which includes one follow-up interview. I received one written feedback here and two sustainability policy documents from two different companies. So like the latest ones. So if we compare here, there's a smaller number of interviews. I intended to get at least 20, which can be attributed to a lower level of awareness of ZDTs. And there's also a lot of ambiguity like about this technology among the stakeholders. If we talk about the research findings, there were 4 main research findings here. The first one was the identification of factors at the regime and national level and the niche level. Second one was understanding of the logistic and freight ecosystem itself in Australia. Next one was the main business challenges for ZDTs and the recommendations, or I would say the policy recommendations, which is a result of comparison between national and international jurisdictions. So this is the first finding, which actually shows the aesthetic MLP framework for the Australian logistic industry here. Some of the key things at the niche level which influence the adoption or influencing the adoption are the cost of the technology itself, the idea of brand or sustainable brand image among the management, and being part of some CSR group or some international CSR group organization. The key factors which are influencing this transition or they can potentially influence transition in the future at the regime level are the different incentive policies. So they are right now zero incentive for ZDTs. Each state has its own regulations when it comes to transportation. Just 3 have any information about ZDTs. And there's a lack of awareness. These are different factors. The next finding is the freight and logistic ecosystem itself. So this is my illustration based upon the feedback from interviewees. So the ZDT manufacturers, they work together with the distributor partner, who then cater to the needs of retailers and delivery partners. They then work together with different subcontractors and small businesses. Let's say a small business owns 5 or 6 trucks. And then they further work in partnership with individual ZDT drivers, which can actually be the truck owners themselves. The next finding was a key concern of ZDT stakeholders. So the first one is there's an obvious lack of confidence in existing policies because there are no dedicated ZDT policies. There's no confidence on the financing options because there are actually none for ZDTs. There's still a lack of understanding about the technical specifications of available models and the efficiency. There's a lack of charging infrastructure. Stakeholders are confused about the future direction of this technology, whether this is going to be electric truck, hydrogen trucks, or something else. And there's a clear lack of awareness among these businesses about the environmental, economic, and social benefits. The fourth main finding was the recommendations or the policy recommendations, which I divided into 4: legal, financial, communication, organization. This was based upon a research paper, Duffy et al. There are a few new themes which actually emerged from the reviews. Those were the technical, social, and future of ZETs. If we come to we talk about the recommendations. The first one is the legal. One of the stakeholders says that Australia will have to get a policy in place before they can develop incentives. And we are likely behind the countries like US and some of the European countries. So one of the key recommendations here was to mandate the inclusion of at least 20% of ZETs in the logistic and freight industry by 2030. Now this is something like which actually California is already doing it. So they have mandated the inclusion of at least, if you take an example of the medium trucks, at least 50% between 2030 and 2035. And from 2035 onwards, the mandate is to increase the ZETs in their fleet by 75%. Next important legal recommendation is there's no clear mandate to phase out diesel trucks right now. And it will also influence to reduce the average life of trucks in Australia, which is 14 years right now, as compared to in Europe, which is 6 to 9 years. There's a need for a consistent approach across all the Australian jurisdictions. So there's a good thing which is happening, that there was a recent change in Australian design rule to allow like 5 centimeter wider trucks in Australia. So that will influence the availability of trucks in the Australian market going forward. Next important legal recommendation is to have better emission standards for trucks and have regulations for emissions reporting for heavy duty trucks. So one stakeholder sees that almost every country in the world has fuel efficiency standards except for Australia. But there's a good thing. Australian government has introduced Euro 6 emission standards for heavy vehicles, and this will be implemented from next month onwards. But if we compare this to the new EU regulation, which has actually made it more stricter, and they want to reduce the carbon dioxide level in 2030 from 30% to 43% and up to 90% in 2040. Or if you compare this to what California is doing, they have even launched a detailed reporting requirement in 2019 for the large fleet owners and governments who are using the heavy duty vehicles in California. So so Australia is actually way behind. If we move to the financial recommendations, the key problem here is the high upfront purchase cost of ZETs, which is 2.5 times that of diesel trucks. And stakeholders, they are looking for support to bridge this gap or to close this gap between electric truck, which cost 150,000 Australian dollars as compared to 80,000 for a diesel truck. And this, again, California serves as a very good example, which launched hybrid and zero emission truck bus voucher incentive program in 2009, which offsets roughly half the cost of ZETs. New Zealand has also adopted the similar strategy as California to offer a point of sale discount of up to 25% for the purchase of new trucks, or if someone wants to convert the ICE to ZETs. This is not as big as California, which is 50%, but at least they're offering 25%. Now, this is quite an interesting one. Germany in 2021 has actually launched a scrappage incentive to reduce the number of diesel trucks on roads. One stakeholder says that in Germany, you actually pay the scrapper holder vehicle. And unless Australian government is prepared to do that, no one is going to scrap a 5 or 6-year-old truck. Stakeholders also need financial support for charging infrastructure to support installation of fast chargers. And New Zealand has actually done a public-private partnership of $60 million. They have invested to create a robust infrastructure for electric trucks. This is quite reasonable because each installation of a charging infrastructure actually cost 100,000 to 150,000 Australian dollars, which is quite high. And stakeholders also actually want the Australian government to work towards supporting local manufacturing instead of importing the ZETs, like widening the truck width and allowing more from European countries. They want something which supports the local manufacturing. So one stakeholder says that tax incentives and credits, they are should be given by the state and federal governments to help support local manufacturing, something which North American manufacturers are receiving, and unless otherwise the Australian trucking industry will be left behind. So coming to organizational recommendations, the public-private partnership is very important because businesses and government, they have to work together. It is not just big businesses that need transition, but even the small businesses as well, but they don't have the capital to do it. Stakeholders want to see some kind of leadership from government by incorporating at least a certain percentage of ZDTs in their fleet, which will also affect the management perspective of private companies. And we do need a communication strategy to communicate the economic, environmental, and social benefits on one side, and also the available financial support and policies to stakeholders. So actually one stakeholder he says that, what we do right now, I'm not selling trucks. What I'm doing right now is just most of the time educating the businesses. Because they're not aware of the benefits of ZETs, they're not aware of what is happening today, and for some, this isn't really even a thing yet. When coming to the technical recommendations, at this point, majority of the stakeholders, they think that it is the light and the medium duty zero emission trucks, or the battery trucks, which makes sense because they do not have to go very large distances. So businesses really don't have to worry about the range anxiety for the urban applications. Now, there are many social benefits. So it is the zero emission or the battery electric truck, they're actually very smooth. They are noiseless, they are fumeless, they have ergonomic benefits, because they don't have this kind of jerking kind of an arrangement. And it also has a great environmental impact, as highlighted by one stakeholder who says that trucks can actually make a real environmental impact. So the one truck on the road is equivalent to taking 20 IC cars off the road when you're taking the same equivalent in diesel. Now, if we talk about the future of ZETs, hydrogen is being viewed as the next promising technology and also the sustainable solution for the long haulage freight transportation, which is actually mentioned in all the policy documents, and this is also validated by all the interviewees. But for now, the technology which is readily available in the market is electric truck. So one stakeholder is saying, actually most of the stakeholders, they think that it is better to try tackling the battery efficiency because that is available in the market right now. The technology is progressing so quickly that in the year, it actually has gone to a completely different system. And there are others who think that hydrogen is 5 or 10 years way behind the electric truck in terms of scale, in terms of performance, but it is way ahead for heavier sector. So this is something which you should work towards for the heavier sector or for the long haulage sector. But there are few concerns right now, major the safety concerns when it comes to hydrogen. There are safety concerns regarding the hydrogen storage, the utilization of the engine, and the sensors, the constant monitoring, and which are quick to pick up if there are any leaks in hydrogen, because this cannot be picked up by a naked eye. And so this is a bit of a letdown or a key issue right now. Coming to the conclusion, so with the current rate of 30,000 sales of or the current amount of small amount of EV trucks being sold in Australia, the target of net zero carbon 2050 cannot be met. Companies, they need a solid framework for a long period of time, such as in terms of purchase incentives and tax rebates, to flatten the initial investments. State governments is already doing a lot of investment in electric passenger cars, but there's no policy direction or incentive for ZATs. And if I showed you the freight and logistic framework, so at the bottom, those small businesses, subcontractors, and individual owners, they need financial support. These are the SMEs who need a lot of financial support, or something like a tailored loans, like for example, like a ZAT loan, to reduce the capital expenditure and also to narrow the intention purchase gap. Without policy intervention, the pace of this change will be very slow, and we need to include silent voices like the voices of truck drivers, or the trucking unions, or even the academic institutions. The stricter regulation when it comes to data reporting, we need stricter regulation when it comes to data reporting and monitoring, which is none for any of the jurisdictions. And so I would like to conclude this presentation by a quote from a stakeholder who says that we need time to build strategies. Although at this time we should be implementing strategies, but I think we lack strategies. So these are some of the highlights. So I was very happy to receive good feedback from examiners who said that ZETs, one of the examiners actually said that ZETs, they have been relatively neglected in the FLN industry. So this work presents original and much needed analysis for this industry. I also had an opportunity to present my thesis finding to the Principal Policy Officer at the NSW Department of Climate Change, Energy and Environment this month. And I'll be presenting at a conference, my thesis findings at a conference next month at the University of Newcastle. And I'm working on 2 research papers right now. Hope to be published soon. So, this is it. Thank you.
I guess we have time for a couple of questions before to the next papers. So over to you. Anyone online got any questions?
I can ask one, Bob, if
Yes, sure.
that's allowable. Thanks, Archana. I really enjoyed that. And I particularly liked your second finding, the diagram of the tiers, different tiers within the logistics industry, because I think that's very much how it's structured. You kind of got at it in your conclusion, but who should bear the responsibility for the costs associated with this, right? Because you've got these subcontracted tiers going from hugely wealthy supermarkets down to far less wealthy independent operators and SMEs. So where does the cost and responsibility fall? I mean, you talked about small firms getting grants to upgrade their truck, but shouldn't powerful actors further up be footing the costs for this? So there's a kind of, so what's your reading on that?
Actually, the main burden of this financing right now is on this sector, the subcontractors, because they have to abide by the if there is any sustainability target which are set up by companies or big retailers like IKEA. So IKEA being part of a bigger group, it's just for example, they have their own sustainability strategy or CSR strategy as part of the global group. So they have to abide by this, but they are not the ones who can support the subcontractors. So there's a lot of pressure, and they have working actually in close partnership with these individual drivers as well, who are also many times they are the truck owners. So they are approaching these people and asking that that they can't afford to buy a truck when they are, they are the owners and they are the drivers. That's the only earning for them, way of living. So yeah, so the major pressure right now is actually on subcontractors, and that is why they need a lot of financial support, because these are the people who even if we reduce like 20% mandate for it to for ZETs to be part of the fleet, they can actually still manage like this group here, but they cannot.
Anyone else has a question for Archana? We can probably use the next couple of minutes. So I think you have one.
So I was interested to know whether in your interviews, did they talk about battery recycling? As we get towards a EV, say it is, I think the recycling of batteries would be an issue later in the future. So did that come up in your interview or no?
Thanks, Sanjeev. So my interviews, as I said, they were semi-structured, and so the major focus was on understanding the challenges are and what the policies are which are affecting the businesses for now and the future. So I really didn't talk much about the battery recycling thing because that is the next stage. Right now, people want to focus more on the battery innovation, how to improve the performance of the batteries that improves the efficiency of the trucks, mainly for the urban applications, and if also possible for the long haulage. But that's like maybe not something which is going to happen in like soon. So that's why people are focusing either improving the technology. The battery recycling thing, there was just one interviewee who was not supportive of ZCDs, who said that, oh yeah, I don't think they are very sustainable because of the battery issues, but he was anyways not involved into anything, or not aware of what's happening with the industry itself. So this thing, this is actually one of the limitations which I've highlighted in my thesis, that I also had a limitation of time because of the MPhil has, I have to finish everything in 2 years. So if something like a PhD, I have these, like for my future research, I want to incorporate interviews from more battery manufacturers, more financial institutions, and even the smaller contractors and the smaller businesses. So that's actually the plan for my future research.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Either from people in the room? Yes, Sandhya.
Thank you, Archana. It's fantastic. And I'm very interested in the relationships between the public sector and the private sectors, especially you mentioned that they emphasize the need of public-private partnerships. I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit on what expectations of those private sectors on the public sectors of Australia, and is there any specific groups of public sectors they are they look forward to having a bigger role in leading this industry?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, so I can give you example from my research for this public-private partnership. So one thing, the major expectation in terms of public-private partnership is for the investment, because that's the biggest obstacle or the barrier for this adoption. They want to see something which California is doing. The businesses, they need support from government to come up with some incentives for the upfront purchase, which reduces the upfront purchase cost. If not 50% what California has done, but at least 25% which New Zealand is doing. So that's one thing. Another thing is, yes, as I highlighted in one of my slides, they want to see some sort of leadership from the government. So while mandating including 20%, at least 20% of ZETs as part of the fleet, until 2030, and then increasing it from there on. So it shouldn't just be be mandated for the public sector, for the private sector, but it should also be seen or be incorporated for the public sector, the NSW government. So yeah, so these are things. The but they want to see such kind of leadership. So the main thing is investment and then this leadership, because if they are uptaking the ZATs, if people see that the government is doing it, so it creates, it sends a positive message to the wider business community that they should also do it. If government is doing it, they can also do it.
Anyone else? Okay, well,
Thank you.
thank you. Both of you. We have one more session next week and one additional session that wasn't originally in the program for the 13th of November. We have two more postgrads speaking. So I think the outline of that was distributed the other day. Okay.
Thank you.